Hi, I'm Scott, and this is GreatScott Knitting, a podcast. Welcome to episode 2. Today in Wichita, the forecast is sunny and hot with a high of 97 degrees, and with a humidity, it's going to be between 100 and 105 today. With heat like that, I think it's a great day to stay inside, turn down the air conditioning, and knit. So let's actually talk about knitting today. This week, actually over the past couple of weeks, I have finished a couple of objects, and I'm going to go ahead and share those with you. The first one was a work in progress last time, and that was the Close to You shawl by Justina Lorkowska. And the yarn I used for this was Gherkin's Bucket quick step sock yarn in the colorway called Sedona Sunrise. And you can really see with the way the yarn pooled, the name of the yarn is well suited for that. It's really nice, has a lovely drape. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think it looks really nice. I have a second object that I started and finished. It was an item that I had talked about getting started, and it is the shawl called Unwind by Tracy Miller. Tracy Miller is one of the hosts of Grocery Girls, which is another YouTube podcast that I really enjoy watching. And so this is my version of that shawl. I used my own hand-dyed yarn. So last time we talked, I talked about how I'm a subscriber to Knit Crate, and the May Knit Crate subscription was blank yarn and Kool-Aid, and this the yarn I dyed from that is what I used in this project because I was just antsy to see how the colorways that I created would look actually knit up in a project, and I think that it turned out really, really nicely. I had two different types, styles of dyeing that I used. One is the speckle dye, which is the lighter color in the sort of the reds and purples, and then I did a twist skein dyeing, which is the darker blues and purples. Again, really nice base for this yarn. The base of this yarn is Dyer's Supplier merino nylon fingering 7525 base for this. A really nice yarn to work with too. So I'm excited to be done with that, and really excited with how it turned out. And then when I got done with that, I just kind of needed something to throw on the needles. So I got out some Mandala yarn that I have in my stash. It's a 100% acrylic yarn by Lion Brand. And the colorway that I used was Warlock, which are these blues and tans and browns. And I knit up a relatively quick project. The pattern is called Twist Again by Agnes Kutas. And it's a nice little semicircular shawl. Very quick to knit, very simple. It's okay. I don't know that I would knit it again, but I'm mainly because I'm not a big fan of these types of shawls that are just very narrow and long and swoopy like this. I'm just not a big fan of those, but I thought it looks nice. It was a nice use of that yarn. Okay, so those are all of my finished objects. I'm still working on the Loanges by Cocolat de Cocolatier, which is, if you'll remember, it's this stole. Caught up in another project. It's this green stole that I'm working on with the really geometric lace pattern. Haven't made any progress on that because I was just so excited about doing some of these, finishing up some of these other projects. But I just didn't get back to working on that one. But it's still in my work in progress bucket, so I'll probably be spending some time back with that again. I did have a few acquisitions over the past couple of weeks. What I'm going to focus on in terms of my acquisitions this time are some books that I picked up. First one is the Hand Dyeing Yarn and Fleece by Gail Callahan. This is just a real quick how-to on yarn dyeing, especially with wool. And as I've sort of gotten this yarn dyeing bug, this has come in handy. Actually, it's given me some ideas about what to do with some of the dyeing that I'm working on. So I would recommend this book for anyone who's just starting out with yarn dyeing and wants a little basic primer on how to do that. Another book I've picked up, and this kind of is related to my wanting to start dyeing my own yarn, is the Knitter's Book of Yarn. The Ultimate Guide to Choosing, Using, and Enjoying Yarn. I'll be honest, I haven't really paid much attention to yarn, its construction, all of its different nuances. I just bought yarn, chose a project, knit it up, and was done. Really didn't really think about the product of yarn itself. And so as I've gotten into and interested in dyeing, I have become interested in, well, what are the different, what are the different types of yarn? Why is merino better than regular wool? What about, what's all this about twist and ply, and what does that have to do with how the yarn behaves or how stretchy it is? So I'm going to start going through this book and getting to know a little bit more about yarn. One aspect of this book is not only does it talk about yarn and some of its different types and uses, but it also has patterns that identify different types of yarn that would be used by different types of patterns. So kind of giving you an understanding of how the nature of yarn lends itself better to one pattern versus another. So I look forward to going through and learning more about yarn using this particular text. Oh, and this is by Clara Parks, and I believe it's copyright 2007. The Hand Dyeing Yarn and Fleece was copyright 2010, so it's a relatively newer book. And the last book I want to talk about that I just recently got was the Vogue Knitting, the Ultimate Knitting book. About a year ago, I became interested in trying to build my collection of just text around the art and process and science of knitting, and asked around online, what are some of the best books that one can get that discuss, the aspects of knitting. And most people recommended the Vogue Knitting Ultimate Guide book. So I finally found a copy at a reduced price, brand new copy at a reduced price. And simply, I've done a little bit of reading early on in the earlier chapters where it talks just primarily about yarn. I kind of going to sort of a repeat of what's in this book, But it then goes into different aspects, different techniques, different cast-ons, cast-off, vertical striping, color work, how to block lace, just tons and tons and tons and tons of information. So this isn't going to be one that I sit down and read cover to cover, although I don't know, maybe I will. But it's going to be primarily a reference, something that I go to when it's like, wow, I'm interested in a different type of cast on or a different type of bind off, or I'm going to try and do some intarsia. How does that work? This will be my first go-to as I start doing those researches of different styles and different techniques in knitting. So I'm glad to have this now as part of my knitting library for my reference functions and reference tools. Okay. Well, speaking of dyeing, I have done a little bit more dyeing. Last weekend, I pulled some of the bare yarn out of my slowly growing collection of 2B dyed yarns, and I pulled out a couple of skeins of Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn. And Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn is a 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon blend. And I used a couple of techniques again this time, different from what I used on the Knit Crate yarn. So for the first skein that I created, I used a dip dyeing technique where I used basically kind of I did this using food coloring. I did a dip dyeing technique in this teal color. When I originally did the dip dye, it came out much greener than I had anticipated or desired. So when I was done dip dyeing it and had exhausted that dye color, I then put some just basic blue into the dye bath and put the entire skein back in the dye bath and over dyed the whole thing in blue. I think it really turned out nicely in that you still have some of that darker teal from the dip dyeing, but you also get these lighter blue colors, and it's at first I wasn't really crazy about it, but as I let it kind of sit and looked at it again, the next couple of days later, I really did like the tonal nature of this skein of yarn. So I grew to really like this one, and I'm looking forward to using this in a project soon. The second skein of Stroll fingering weight yarn I did is this one here. And the technique I used with this was very different from what I have, some of the techniques I've used before. This one I did a low immersion dyeing. So it's basically I took a large pan where I could spread the skein of yarn out quite a bit, and then using simply directly the vials of food coloring. Also the pan had just enough water to just barely reach the same level that the yarn was in the pan. So not even an inch of water in the pan itself. And then what I did was I took the vials of food coloring and dropped directly onto the yarn, and then with a spoon gently basically massaged the color into the layers of yarn. And actually I think I'll untwist this one so you can sort of see all of the different nature of the colors. I used 3 colors in this yarn, or in this dye. I used blue, which you can see those deep blue colors. I used, of course, yellow, and I used the green food coloring that came with it as well. And as the dye would bleed across the skein of yarn and across the fibers, they would blend together. And so there's some areas that were just their native color. There are some areas of teal where the blue and the green came together. There's some lighter green sections where the yellow and the green came together, and some different tones of blue where the blue and the yellow came together, or the different tones of green. So I really like how this one turned out. It's really quite lovely. So I plan on using these two skeins of yarn together in an upcoming project. And that project will be the Breathe and Hope by Casapinka. It is a shawl pattern that Casapinka had worked with local yarn shops to promote, and some of the proceeds of the pattern and the yarns that each local yarn shop did would then sort of help those local yarn shops out, especially during the pandemic when everybody was staying home and all the stores were closed. I was really interested in doing that particular shawl because I like its structure. It's asymmetric boomerang style, and I just have lately gravitated to those kinds of shawls. What I ran into is, as I looked at the different kits that local yarn shops across the country were putting together, they were somewhat expensive. So I decided to wait until I could get together my own set of yarn that I was going to use for it. And that's when I started getting into dyeing, and I was like, oh, well, you know what? I'll dye my own set of skeins that I will use in that project. And so that's what I have. So I think these two will look really nice in that project. I have another project that I'm planning on casting on soon as well, probably within the next couple of weeks, and that's the Odyssey Shawl by Hohili Locatelli. This yarn that I'm going to use with that project will be the Knit Picks Upcycle Reserve Alpaca Blend in DK weight, and those are these 3 skeins of yarn because it calls for 3 different skeins or 3 different colorways. And so I'm going to be using these. These are so super soft. I just love the feel of them. They are, it is, the blend on this is 50% upcycle alpaca, 30% upcycle mulberry silk, and 20% upcycle tencel. They are super, super soft and super shiny, and I think they'll look really nice made up in this particular shawl. These 3 colorways are, this one's called Lyra, which is, this lovely navy-ish color. This lighter blue one is called Vega. And then this golden color is called Altair. So they all have these star names and a very shiny quality to them. So that's what I've been up with in the knitting world. Um, Lots of things going on out there in the rest of the world. Last time we talked, I was in the process of going through and watching Star Wars: The Clone Wars. I am still in that process. I am finishing up season 5 and we'll be going on to season 6 and getting ready then for season 7. Maybe I'll get through all that by the end of this next 2 weeks, but I'm not sure. Um, Musically, I've been listening to, oddly enough, a lot of oldies. For some reason, Ode to Billy Joe came up in conversation recently and started listening to that. All these years later, I still don't know why he jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge. So I'm still contemplating that. Other music, just lots of music from the 50s and 60s have been on my playlist over the past couple of weeks. Um, so it'll be interesting to see where the next couple of weeks takes me musically. Um, so a lot of stuff going on out there in the world. COVID-19, the pandemic is still happening, and I'm a little concerned with the fact that people don't seem to be taking it seriously anymore. They seem to have gotten a little complacent or maybe just a little bored with it all and want to simply go back to life as it was before. And I don't think that, personally for me, it's not safe to do that yet. I have personal health concerns that keep me at home. So I am still staying at home. Um, I am a long-term survivor. I have survived 29 years, and so I'm not going to let this virus take me out. So there's that. So I'm staying home still. Um, the other things that are going on in the world right now that are of grave concern to me are the devastating number of Black and people of color who are being brutalized, murdered, and otherwise um, marginalized by our police departments, our justice system, and nothing seems to be changing. We know in America that this is a problem. We have known this has been a problem for years. And politically, we're not doing anything about it. Um, and there's so much that could be done. I don't pretend to truly understand the marginalization of that people of color experience. I am a white guy, cisgendered male. Um, Outwardly, there is nothing about me that would cause me to be marginalized. There are things in my life that do cause that marginalization, but the color of my skin and my outward gender, those are things that do not get in my way. They do get in the way of other people. Um, and those are things that need to change in our world. I think what's important, especially for those of us who are outwardly not marginalized, so those of us who happen to be white of skin and male gendered, I think we need to shut up more and listen. Listen to those people who are experiencing the marginalization, those people who are experiencing the injustice, those communities who are experiencing the unjust murder and brutalization of their citizens. I don't know what the answers are, What I do know is that we need to listen. And once we have listened, we need to then contact our elected officials and tell them that they need to listen. They need to shut up about what they think the answer is and listen to the people that are experiencing the injustice. And then maybe together come up with the answers that will move us further down the road towards a world that is more socially just. As a Jew, I believe that we are placed on this world to help in the perfection of this world. In the from a Jewish perspective, the world was created and God declared that it was good, not perfect, and that we are here to help God complete and perfect creation. And we do that by helping each other, by bringing about justice. The Jewish term for that is tzedek, justice. And we are commanded as people to pursue justice. And I think that it is important at this time to realize that people of color, that our Black community especially, are not living in a just world and are not experiencing the same types of justice that those of us who happen to be white or male get to experience. So that's what I commit to, is listening and in my own way reaching out to those that do have the power to make changes and demanding that they do. And using my power at the ballot box to vote these bastards out that refuse to do anything. So stay safe out there. If you go to a protest, wear your mask, do your best to social distance, wash your hands. If you can't or are unable to in some way, like me, to go out to an actual rally, donate to Black Lives Matter or other social justice organizations. Talk to your representatives, your congresspeople, your mayors, your police chiefs. Demand that they do better. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoy the things that you see on this channel, please click subscribe. If you liked this particular episode, click the like button. You can find me on social media. On Facebook, I have a Facebook page for GreatScott Knitting. It's on facebook.com/GreatScott Knitting. You can find me on Instagram under GreatScott Knitting and on Ravelry under GreatScott KCMO. So stay cool, keep knitting. Thank you for joining.
צדק צדק תרדוף, למען תחיה וירשת את הארץ, אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לה.